on the call. My name is Belle Rivera MP. I am the Parliament for Streatham and co-chair of the Socialist Campaign Group. Now, usually we start that everybody knows who the Socialist Campaign Group are and about. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about us. We were founded in 1982. And throughout our history, we've campaigned for socialist economic policies, against imperialist military interventions, for equality and against all discrimination, for a socialist clause 4 in support of public ownership, and for solutions to the failings of capitalism, the protection of the environment, and for greater party democracy, including open selection. Now, Jeremy Corbyn's successful leadership campaign in 2015 was actually launched by the Socialist Campaign Group. And we now work inside and outside Parliament to secure an election of a Labour government that will implement a socialist programme of transformation for our society and to support trade unions, communities and oppressed people in struggle here in the UK and around the world. So our work is very, very important to us, and what a crucial time it would be. I mean, we're looking at the disgraceful policies of this Conservative government and just how badly they have handled the coronavirus, how horrible things are going to end up with the economy, spinning us into the worst economic recession we've seen in history. But we've also seen that their best, their successes during this particular period of time has been when they've reverted to using policies which they laughed down and from the last previous Labour manifestos. So we are making moves, and we've got a great host of speakers for you tonight, all from our fantastic Socialist Campaign Group. 2019 election wasn't an easy time. We lost and it was devastating, but from that particular election, there was a spring of brand new MPs, fantastic MPs, socialists rooted in their community. And the first of these to speak today is Kim Johnson MP, who is the Member of Parliament for Liverpool Riverside. Kim. Do we have Kim on the call? No, I cannot see Kim on the call. I'm sure Kim will join us later. Instead, we're going to start with another one of the fantastic stars of the 2019 intake, Apsana Begum, a very good friend and comrade, and the Member of Parliament for Poplar and Limehouse. Apsana.
Thank you so much, Belle, and greetings to everyone that has joined us today. Over 900 people, that's an amazing number of people that have joined us, Socialist Campaign Group of MPs. And it's fantastic to be a member of the Socialist Group of MPs in Parliament as somebody who was elected in 2019. I want to begin by really talking about coronavirus. I mean, everyone is talking about us going into this second potential lockdown, this phase of the virus, and I want to pay tribute to the work that has been done by Socialist MPs in Parliament up to this point, who really fought arguments and really put forward socialist ideas to really deal with what is actually a really broken economy and a broken economics. So I want to pay tribute to the work of Jeremy, John, Diane, Ian, Ian Mearns, Ian Lavery, John Trickett, Richard and others, and who really worked hard over the years to really put forward the right arguments for dealing with inequalities in our country. We know that the government has run down our communities and torn away our rights in order to attempt to create a cynical dog-eat-dog world only in which the rich can flourish at the hardship of others. And at this point in time, it's really crucial that our activities as Labour Party members, as trade union activists, as activists in our communities, to increase that. That's really one of the most fundamental responses to the injustices we continue to face. It's the best way to see our pay increase, to see a safer environment at work, to feel freer to express our opinions and have our rights realised. And all of this is so crucial to help us signpost towards a better life. And I really think that our activities in our trade unions, in the Labour Party, is going to be able to achieve that. I've just come back from a protest which was just outside a really plush hotel in my constituency, a protest that was organised by London Renters Union, along with Momentum and other groups. And this is a group of renters that now about to face evictions and have had lots of threats, hostility, harassment, and increased surveillance from a very rich landlord who is somewhere in Monaco. And just to witness that community coming together, people from all walks of life in London coming together, standing outside this hotel and really demanding their rights, demanding the right to housing, which should be seen as a fundamental human right. It was wonderful to see that activity, to see people take collective action to try and hold people to account, to hold organizations to account. And that's the kind of activity that we know we need to see going forward as well. And solidarity to everybody that really was out there and was really fighting for these renters, because we know that 55,000 people are now faced with the threat of eviction, 330,000 people with rent arrears, and through the pandemic we have seen an increase of 50% of unlawful evictions as well through the pandemic. This is not people who are choosing not to pay their rent and choosing to be in the situations that they now find themselves in. These are people that have been trying to negotiate and speak to their landlords and are not getting support that they desperately need. So it's really important that we continue to address the flaws in our systems and decisions that are being made, and to hold the government to account and show real opposition. And that's what we in the Socialist Campaign Group of MPs really want to do. We want to make sure that we put up a strong opposition to the government. I want us all to talk about the fact that a lot of us have been talking about how the pandemic has really exposed how the Tories' economies for the few, and it's not fit for purpose, and it's fundamentally unfair and unequal. And I've talked about housing, but we can see this in local government. We can see that in the fire and rescue services, and other areas which have been driven by an agenda of cuts, deregulation, and privatization, fostered by direct lobbying of private business interests, just like I'm seeing in my constituency. And I really want to pay tribute to those of you that have joined us today who are delivering public and essential services, and especially to our NHS staff on the front line as well, because it's really clear that public services as a whole are ill prepared for dealing with this type of large-scale public health risk. And because we've seen cuts on a scale not seen for generations, with services cut to the bone and in some cases beyond. And that's what so many of our, the leadership within the Socialist Campaign Group of MPs was really trying to do over the last few years, really actually talk about austerity and the impact of austerity. And we need to make sure we keep fighting on that point as well. What could be more important than saving lives and protecting people's dignity in their later years? But this is not what we're seeing from the government. I'm going to end just by saying that we need to oppose the government every step of the way. I'm going to be with you on that, always pushing back against attacks on our rights and the privatization and the marketization of our services. And just thinking about what Jeremy actually said months and months ago, actually, the COVID-19 crisis has really exposed the weakness in our economy and society, but it's also showing us just how dependent we are on each other. And I've been humbled to see how people have been organising to protect our communities in these difficult times. And it's in this spirit that we must go forward together. I'll be with you on the picket lines in Parliament and on demonstrations with you on that as well. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Apsana. And also thank you for keeping to time. That is something that some of our Socialist Campaign Group members, although always fantastic, are not well known for. But we are trying to get everybody in today, and just to remind all the speakers that everybody will be speaking for just 5 minutes. If you are tweeting, now that most of my things are now working, you will see just up here the Socialist Campaign Group Twitter account. Please tag us in and let us know what you think about what's happening today at our rally. Our next speaker, another fantastic star of the 2019 intake, Slayer of the Sun newspaper and all things evil, one of our fantastic MPs from Liverpool, Ian Byrne.
Thanks, Belle. And thanks very much for giving me the opportunity tonight to speak. I'm quite honoured and humbled to be in such company tonight, and it's always been a great ambition of mine to actually stand alongside the people that I'm actually speaking with now. So I couldn't be prouder, and brilliant first opening by Afsana. So follow that, as we say in Liverpool. So I just want to touch on food poverty, really. Surprisingly, a lot of my activism comes from fighting food poverty in Liverpool with fan support and food banks, and you can see the banner behind me. Unity is strength. It's something I firmly believe in. And I just want to open with a statement which Philip Alston, Professor Sir Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, said in 2017, and I think it sums up where we are as a society. The bottom line is that much of the glue that has held British society together since the Second World War has been deliberately removed and replaced with a harsh and uncaring ethos, pursued more as an ideological than an economic agenda. And we are living through a humanitarian crisis at the moment. Millions and millions of people unable to put food on the table. Millions of people wondering where the next penny is going to come from. And I think us as socialists need to have the answers. So I think it's something that we need to address. And I'd like to spend the next couple of minutes just outlining potentially a couple of things that we could do coming together collectively to aid our communities. And the question we must pose is, how do we reverse this shameful growth in food insecurity, poverty, and how socialists can we effectively change our class and our country so desperately require post-COVID to shape a society that can reverse this damage so future generations do not face the same callous environment and inequality. And I'd like to touch on two things. The right to food, something which I am pushing and I will continue to push while I'm in Parliament. And in 2019, in the Labour Party manifesto, which was a document of beauty and would have affected so much positive change in our communities, and it's credit to the people on this call who shaped that and put it down in a document which we can certainly build on moving forward. And enshrining the right to food into law can have so many positive impacts on people's lives, because what it would do, it would ensure that whatever government's in power has to tackle hunger and can be accountable. We'll have measures. So with it being in legislation, we can actually have the legal power behind it, so we can hold governments to account. We can actually rebuild the welfare system using right to food, because many of the pernicious policies which the Tories have put in place in 2010 could have been challenged in a court of law, and it would have made such an impact. And as I say, we could have reversed some of the issues that are affecting our communities. So the right to food is something for everyone on this call. I'd love to work alongside me, my fellow MPs, to build this moving forward and build a movement from grassroots up, community-led, that we demand that no one in our community should go hungry. So running parallel to that, I'd like to look at community food plans, because this is something I'm absolutely huge believer in. Grassroots, community-led answers to what's actually happening with our communities, because the lack of affordable and nutritious food is a direct and devastating impact on so many in our communities. And you look at the work Marcus Ratchford's done in bringing this to people's attention. You know, he's probably the only Man United striker's name and sing on the place behind me, but he's been absolutely fantastic, Rashford. And this, for me, the locally developed community food plans would help to improve food systems, supply vital food, education, and encourage the development and growth of these networks. This is absolutely crucial, because what we want to do with the right to food is embody a shift from charity to solidarity, from donations to collaborations. And for me, this shows how socialism can actually work in action within our communities. A tangible example of by coming together, communities coming together, and we can solve a problem which is affecting millions within the community. Because as a nation, we cannot continue to fail millions of people with life expectancy rates between 10 years in Liverpool, Kensington and London. Our children are being raised by parents in survival mode due to food poverty. And I firmly believe only radical socialist policies can offer the answers to fix our broken society. So no going back to abstaining on cuts to welfare for the most vulnerable in our communities. No going back to the language of austerity. No going back to controls on immigration mugs. No going back to thinking the working class has nowhere else to go. No going back to big donors and corporate lobbyists. And no going back to the incestuous relationship with Murdoch and MPs writing in a paper that promotes division, hatred, and lied about an entire city. No going back to treating trade unions like an embarrassing relative. Our job is to make sure we go forward, break down walls with radical policies that change the direction of this country, not tinker around the edges, keeping the status quo intact, which has led to the rampant inequality that we're seeing. Our job is to make sure we go forward with socialist policies that transform our society for the many, forward to a living wage and security for our key workers, forward to rapid urbanisation and an economic model that puts people and the planet first, forward to a world with legislation in place that secures housing, food, as championed by the Labour campaign for human rights, forward to repealing the anti-trade union laws and building the collective power of the working class once again, forward to empowering a grassroots membership that can help transform our society and communities by building a social movement to effect change up from the bottom, forward to a socialist Labour government that can achieve all this and more. Solidarity and no turning back.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. You're absolutely right. We need radical socialist policies to change our society. And it seems there are many, many people that agree with you. We have 5,000 people tuning in to the call at the moment on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom, and any other social media platform that I might have forgotten, but we're streaming on loads of different platforms tonight, and there are many, many people joining us. We're going to move on quickly because we want to get all of our fantastic Socialist Campaign Group members in. Our next speaker is another star of the 2019 group, and I know I keep saying that, but that's because they're also fantastic. Another comrade and friend, Zara Sultana, who is the Member of Parliament for Coventry South. Zara.
Thanks, Belle. And Ian, you're such a hard act to follow, not just your speech, but your background. It's incredible. And I say that as a proud Liverpool fan. Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Sultana. I am proudly the Member of Parliament for Coventry South. And thank you to Belle for the introduction and to everyone behind the scenes who's organising this. The tech is working amazingly, so props to you. I just want to start off by saying how proud I am to be speaking at my very first Socialist Campaign Group rally alongside heroes of mine like John, Diane, and Jeremy. When I was elected, one of the first things I did was to join the campaign group. And that was because I know the tradition of the campaign group and what it represents. It's unapologetically socialist, unequivocally internationalist, and steadfastly anti-racist. From Tony Benn to Bernie Grant to the great comrades we have today, including those on this call, this political tradition is needed now more than ever. This pandemic has exposed to us, like never before, the inequalities that scar our society. But not just that, it has exposed the utter failure of conservative ideology and the contempt they hold for the working class. It has been a litany of failures from start to finish. They were advised to lock down, they ignored it, and thousands more people have died as a result. They discharged care home residents from hospitals without tests and sent carers from one home to another with no tests or adequate PPE. We saw doctors and nurses forced to make PPE from bin bags. We've seen hundreds of frontline staff die, but still the government denies them a pay rise. They've kept sick pay below £96 a week, forcing people to work even when they have symptoms. And they've handed out the test, track, and trace system to private companies only for it to be botched time and time again and for testing to crumble just when it's needed the most. Now we have the highest excess death toll in Europe, the worst recession of wealthy OECD nations, and a second wave without the crucial infrastructure to deal with it. And despite all of this, they try to shirk responsibility. One of their MPs blamed Muslims for the spike in cases. Matt Hancock blames young people. And the Home Secretary spent weeks this summer trying to distract us with a supposed migrant crisis. But we know that this is a lie, and we know who's to blame. It's this rotten government, their failed ideology, and their rigged system. Their failure isn't just incompetence. It's not just bad management. It's political. It's deeply ideological. They say private good, public bad. They put profits before people. And in the process, their friends get richer. Our working class people, especially those from minority ethnic backgrounds, are disproportionately dying and forced into poverty. That's why we have to be clear about our alternative. We don't just need a more competent response. We don't just need a more competent government. We need a socialist response. We need a socialist government. And our answers are more relevant than ever. We've seen how our public services need investment. So let's commit to investing in them and expanding them. We've seen that privatization enriches the few and robs the rest of us. So let's end it. We've seen that it's not millionaire bankers we need in a crisis to keep our society running. It's nurses, cleaners, teachers, shop assistants, bus drivers, taxi drivers. It's the working class in all of our diversity. So let's build a society run by and for them. And all this time, with each passing day, we're seeing the signs of climate breakdown. We've seen California burn, South Asia flood, and our planet racing towards climate catastrophe. Capitalism created this crisis. It definitely will not be fixing it. Only socialism will. Our opponents seek to divide us. They want to turn on us to turn on each other. Black against white, Muslim against Christian, migrant against those who are born here, cis against trans. They want us to feel alone, isolated, and without hope. And that's how they will win. In a post-COVID society, they will do this with more venom than ever. But when we win, we build the bonds of solidarity, when we link our struggles and when we stand up for each other. So comrades, there is no time for despair. We have a world to win. Thank you, and solidarity.
Thank you, Zara. Absolutely, socialism is the answer. Thank you very much. Moving straight on to our next speaker, a stalwart of the Socialist Campaign Group, the Member of Parliament from Hemsworth in West Yorkshire, the second greatest area of the country. And that is John Trickett MP. John?
Thanks very much, Belle, and what a great privilege it is to see so many new comrades coming into Parliament, sitting on this rally today. And it's thanks to everybody on this call and the thousands of people who supported the left leadership of Jeremy Corbyn that we have so many great new MPs. And I want to let me just start with this, that there are people now who are advising the new Labour leadership, to quote a phrase, to play the long game, to limit their opposition to criticising government fiscal and administrative incompetence. Of course, it's true the Tories are bumbling along. It's one blunder after another, and it's people's lives which are at stake. But restricting our opposition in that way cannot be the position for the left. The government's actions are not damaging the country because they're neutral and bumbling. They're damaging the country because they're highly ideological. They intend to change Britain fundamentally and forever. Let's be clear about that. Let me just give one example. The Tory idea that somehow there is no magic money tree. That assertion was used to starve the NHS, the care service, the education system, and even the criminal justice systems of funds for so many years. It left our communities lacking in the resilience which we needed to face this virus when it came. And it was said also that there was no magic money tree when the wages and the salaries of key workers were held down for year after year after year. And now, read the papers carefully, you'll see they're whispering that they even may be intending to cut benefits in the upcoming budgets, and we know they're after our pensions. But when it comes to the Tories themselves and their mates in big business, an entirely different rule has been applying. Suddenly, a tree appears as if from nowhere, dripping with cash, like the money appeared by magic. Take Chris Grayling, the minister, you remember? He was always failing. Suddenly, they got him a job out of the blue. £100,000 per year for a 7-hour week. That's the equivalent to 4 people working full-time for a year on average pay in my constituency, and that's on top of his MP salary. And then there's the healthcare firm Randox. It employs former Tory Minister Owen Paterson. He's a paid consultant. And suddenly that company was awarded a £133 million contract without even being required to tender, as far as we can see. And Owen Paterson is being paid £8,000 a month working for them. And then there are the firms with personal links to Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings. They've been handed over contracts of almost £1 million, apparently without any consideration of alternative suppliers. Again, the list goes on and on and on. More than a dozen companies with links to the Tory party won almost £500 million in contracts for equipment during the lockdown. So there is a magic tree when it comes to the Tories and big business. This isn't incompetence. It's hands in the wallets of the taxpayers' time. It's cronyism on an industrial scale. But it's also highly ideological. Let's be clear about this. It's about attacking the public sector, reducing the spending power of working people, and shifting income and wealth in favour of the already rich. It's what the Tories always do, but this time with brass knobs on. Under these circumstances, it is the job of socialists not simply to call out incompetence, but also to call out the true nature of this government. So let's make the charge of incompetence stick. But it's more than that, isn't it? Here we have in front of us today and every day a full-blooded Tory assault on so much of that which has formed the social contract which was supposed to hold our country together. And so look, there is a solemn duty on the left, not simply to give advice from the sidelines to the Labour leadership. It's the job of the left to lead. And after the election, perhaps it was natural that we look inwards. But comrades, the time for introspection is well over now. Now, members of the Socialist campaign group will play their role in the fight back, but change never comes from above. It's only when socialists and trade unionists, patients and carers, people on minimum wage and professionals whose jobs are under threat all come together in a movement, then we will win. Comrades, there is a job to do. Let me finish with the old slogan. The cause of Labour is the only hope for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move straight on because we've got a packed programme. Our next speaker is none other than Shami Chakrabarti, comrade, sister, and defender of civil liberties. Shami.
Thank you, Belle. It's an absolute privilege to join this rally in solidarity and hope for the future. I join that call this evening for a new radical settlement coming out of the current pandemic, just as previous generations forged after global crises. That's rights for all people, not just the most privileged, who with the help of Johnson, Trump and Cummings shield themselves from the worst health and wealth consequences of these times, whilst demanding that others get back to work, school and the front line of infection as cleaners, construction and care workers with inadequate testing and tracing, and sometimes, as we've heard, with only bin liners for protection. They've been treated like the working poor of the past, sent to unsafe mills, mines and trenches, whilst their paymasters complain about the inconvenience of wearing a mask or not being able to drive their Land Rovers and Labradors to beauty spots at any moment of their choosing. Everyone loves some human rights, their own. It's just other people's that are a little bit harder to swallow. There's a lot of talk again these days about patriotism. I'm happy to call myself a patriot, but not if that means using human rights as justification for wars over there, but never for refugee protection over here. And not if patriotism means nationalism and even xenophobia, that old right-wing trick of divide and rule, turning the world's poor against one another as a distraction from the death and destruction caused by inequality and greed, whether during COVID or at Grenfell or in unnecessary wars or impending climate catastrophe. Why should internationalism just be for oligarchs and organised criminals and not for ordinary people and the values that can help them come together? And now more than ever, medical uniforms are surely just as important as military ones. And our greatest national treasure is the NHS. It's been admired and envied by ordinary people all over the world for over 70 years and was built and continues to be delivered by people from all over the world as well. It's perhaps the greatest socialist experiment in world history, so successful and so popular that its enemies can only ever undermine it by stealth. And just as it's admired by ordinary people, it's eyed up greedily by private companies who lick their lips at gaining access to our most personal information and carving up our services for profit, putting up the price of vital drugs and vaccines. Just as we need to better protect our NHS heroes, we need to protect the NHS itself from attack. We own it. So let's protect it, not with warm words or even pots and pans on a Thursday night. We need an urgent amendment to the trade bill. Our NHS is not for sale, and nor are our human rights. Black Lives Matter is not a moment, it's a movement that can be traced back to the struggle against slavery itself. I stand with them and against structural and endemic racism. And I will never stand with Rupert against Greta. Extinction Rebellion is in a noble tradition of peaceful, direct action so that ordinary people's voices might be heard. Free speech is a two-way street. We need to fight the Overseas Operations Bill, which according to Amnesty International would effectively decriminalise torture. I'll take no lessons in patriotism for this Tory government, after they left so many World War II survivors to perish in ill-prepared private care homes. Friends, let's be clear. Beyond this terrible time, there'll be no going back to January 2020. It's either forward to a more equal, peaceful and sustainable world, or it's far, far back. Some will argue for 1920, others for 1820. I am not of their number. And remember, solidarity isn't just the destination, it's the best means of transport as well.
Thank you, Shami. We're going to move straight on to our next speaker, who also happens to be my co-chair of the Socialist campaign group, the fantastic Member of Parliament for Gateshead, Ian Mearns.
Thank you, Bill. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to be speaking at this rally. What an absolute privilege. The last 6 months of COVID-19 have thrown into stark relief the huge disparities in our society at all levels, but in particularly the disadvantages suffered by so many children. Disadvantage in living conditions, disadvantage in access to learning, in basic necessities, and in food. In 2020, at the end of the second decade of the 21st century, we are witnessing hundreds of thousands of our children without enough to eat, without a good, nutritious, balanced diet, in the 5th richest country in the world. Additionally, so many of those youngsters have been deprived of their education that is so vital to them because of their lack of access to technology, a computer to use, and of the means to connect to the internet to access their online learning. The fact that all of this seemingly came as a surprise to those in government was certainly a surprise to me, because we've been telling them about these sorts of problems for the last decade that they have been in power. They have consistently denied that these problems exist. And across government, they've consistently been able to say to us, when we point out these inequalities, these deprivations and sufferings, that they don't recognise the statistics that we throw at them. And that's because in so many things, they've actually stopped collecting or collating the evidence themselves. And as Ian Byrne pointed out earlier, it has taken a young Manchester United footballer to highlight some of these problems so that the media are forced to take notice, to take this suffering seriously, and to force a government climb down on school meals during the summer holidays. But comrades, this government haven't been incompetent during the COVID-19 crisis, but they've been incompetent in virtually every area of government, in every government department for a decade. They have seen real growth, but in what? They've seen real growth in child poverty, job insecurity, unemployment, low wages, homelessness, overcrowding, educational disadvantage, low life expectancy, police cuts, health inequalities. Now, none of these things are a shock to us, but the way to end all of these dreadful iniquities is a real, radical, transformational socialist programme. In the face of all these problems, changing the country bit by bit doesn't cut the mustard. We must continue to be committed to a real positive socialist change, comrades. Solidarity, solidarity.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. And just so that everybody knows, the Socialist Campaign Group has formally endorsed the 6 grassroots voice candidates for the upcoming elections to the Labour Party NEC. We want to see socialism right across our party. The slate is committed to supporting the programme set out in the 2017 and 2019 Labour manifestos for the many, not the few, a serious transformation of the economy and all those measures that will address inequality and promote public ownership and a foreign policy based on peace and justice. Every single one of these individuals has a track record of promoting party democracy, supporting open elections, a democratic sovereign annual conference, enabling members to select the candidates they want to, and building democratic, inclusive and equality structures. They are known as the Grassroots Voice 6, and their names are Laura Pidcock, Gemma Bolton, Yasmin Dar, Anne Henderson, Nadia Jama and Mish Rahman. And we encourage all of you who want to see positive and socialist policies right across our party all the time to support them. So we're going to carry on, make sure that we're getting everybody in. Our next speaker, and I think this might actually be the last time I say this today because of the speakers that we have remaining, is another star of the 2019 intake. They're all stars, they're all fantastic. It's Claudia Webb, the Member of Parliament for Leicester East, a long time socialist campaigner and comrade. Claudia.
Just unmute myself. Thank you so much, Belle. Thank you for that great introduction. It's great to be speaking at this Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs rally. And it comes at a time when our socialist message of redistributing power and wealth couldn't be more important. And it's such a pleasure to join such an inspiring range of comrades and friends this evening. One of our key messages tonight must be that the government needs to take urgent action on a number of fronts, or we are facing a massive public health and jobs catastrophe. When we consider When we consider our current moment of global racial and class inequality, it is absolutely clear that the crisis we face today, from climate change to the rise of authoritarian governments, are animated by an intersect with class struggles. Again and again in this crisis, the Tories have put the interests of the few ahead of the interests of the many. Again and again, they have put the interests of private profit before the interests of people and planet and their health. When we look at our world today, a world in which half of global wealth belongs to the richest 1%, a world in which global and regional inequalities are defined by racialized violence and extraction, we see another historical epoch which remains defined in Marx's language of the oppressor and oppressed. The COVID-19 crisis is, of course, unprecedented in the scale of its economic and social disruption, yet it's also shining a light on existing racial, class and global inequalities which have deepened after half a century of brutal, unrestrained neoliberal policies. While billionaires increase their wealth and self-isolate on luxury yachts, workers across the world are forced to put themselves at risk in order to pay the bills. The mortality rate of deaths involving coronavirus in the most deprived areas of England was more than double that in the least deprived areas. This shows that it's impossible for people to self-isolate without the material means to do so. This is the context in which the coronavirus crisis is operating. The uneven deaths reflect a global economic system which has actually been built upon the subordination of the working class. As unpleasant as it is to think about, the fact is that an even more devastating crisis than COVID-19 is already here, the climate crisis. And climate change is also a class issue. The world's richest 1% cause double the carbon emission of the poorest 50%. With a third of Bangladesh currently underwater, the Amazon burning, land being stolen from the indigenous communities for mining, whilst the wealthiest Americans pay for personal private firefighters. We know that this crisis will not affect us all equally. We must respond to the coronavirus crisis with an unprecedented emphasis on phasing out carbon-intensive industries whilst transferring renewable energy as soon as scientifically possible. It is vital that workers are protected and that the green transition is predicated upon justice for global South countries, improving living standards for all, and an economic stimulus to revitalise our recession-hit economy with well-paid unionised jobs. We can't tolerate the government acting too slowly again to protect public health. We, as a Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs, are therefore clear that we need a new approach to fighting the coronavirus. We, as Socialists, must be clear that as this crisis develops, the Tories will resort to playing divide and rule and scapegoating the excluded. The Tories will blame everyone but themselves for the crisis we face. We have seen it with asylum seekers and refugees in recent weeks. Before that, we saw it with Muslims and the Black Lives Matter movement protests. We must reject this scapegoating and stand united. Ours is an international struggle. Never again should we stand idly by whilst African men, women and children are gunned down by state-sanctioned uniformed officers using weapons made in Britain. The crisis we face require radical solutions. We stand on a precipice in which climate breakdown, rampant race inequality, and the shockingly uneven distribution of wealth seem irreversible. Yet as Socialists, we know that it is an alternative that is possible to build a society around the needs of all its citizens and the principles of solidarity. The immense amounts of public money spent during the pandemic has shown that the world which we on the left have been fighting for is not only possible, but is also the only viable option if we are to avoid planetary breakdown. The crisis we face, from coronavirus to the climate emergency, can only be tackled by strong collective action, which prioritises people and planet over private profit. Comrades, our socialist message of real change couldn't be more relevant, and real change couldn't be more needed in terms of protecting millions of people's lives and livelihoods. A better world is possible. Let's build it together. It's up to all of us to fight for that better world in which all of us, every single one of us, all of us can live in dignity. Solidarity, my friends, solidarity.
Thank you, Claudia. It was fantastic. Thank you. This is officially now one of the biggest meetings at this year's online conference. I've just been told, just fantastic news, as well as people joining us on all of the platforms we've told you about before. We're also being streamed live by the World Transformed for the Many, Labour Outlook, Tribune, Red Labour, and Arise. That is the strength of our movement. Thank you so much to everybody that's continuing to join us today. We have some great speakers to come. And our next great speaker is Lloyd Russell-Moore, MP, the Member of Parliament for Brighton, Kemp Town. You know, we always hear about the Tories all being mates from years before and knowing each other, but actually part of the strength of the Socialist Campaign Group and our movement is a lot of our MPs have been doing this for a long time, long before they were MPs, and Lloyd is one of those. Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Belle. And thank you everyone for coming along and listening and hearing us tonight. It is so important that we gather in what I think has been a remarkably difficult year. Of course, COVID has been really difficult, but let's not underestimate the loss of leadership election for us is extremely difficult as well. Before I came on here, I was reading a report from another person in one of our emergency accommodations in Brighton that has committed suicide. This is not just the first suicide, but one of numerous suicides in one emergency accommodation block that we have in the city. So regular it is now, that accommodation block, Catholic, the private provider, called one of the rooms the suicide room. This is the basement room where the latest suicide has happened as well. The problem is, if we do not transform things like the housing market, people will continue to commit suicide. People will continue to feel that there is no hope. And we, whilst not in power, have also the ability to help give hope to those people who are in emergency accommodation, those people who are suffering without money to be able to feed their children, those people who are not just those, but they are us, many of us who have experienced similar things and continue to experience similar things. The hope that our movement gives, that things can be better, is important. So whilst we might not, on the Socialist Campaign Group, have won the leadership election, it is so important that we continue to put that light of hope forward. And yes, of course, the colleagues in the Labour Party will. But the reality is, it is continually the Socialist Campaign Group voice that has shown that light time and time again. Last year, I told you about how parents in my constituency were organising against the academisation of a primary school. They'd taken direct action, and whilst I don't condone it, of course, they'd slashed the ties of the directors of the academy chain and tried to take over their academy, and the academy chain withdrew. The next academy chain came along, and they stood outside the workplaces of the directors of the academy chain, saying, so-and-so is messing with our children, get the academy chain out, and that academy chain withdrew as well. A year later, still, that school has not been able to be academised by the government. And that is because the parents in that school took direct action against the academisation order. I had another school where this summer, The school bulldozed the swimming pool, a community asset, because they said the £5,000 to maintain it was too expensive. Now, the academy chain that authorised that has a fraud investigation against it because local parents gathered the evidence and took them to court. Yes, we might not win the votes in Parliament, but with organisation on the ground, we can win many of those arguments time and time again. And that's why it is so important that we do so. And it is so important that we support that activities in the communities, because this government will try and divide and rule. They will try and play culture wars, whether it is on trans rights or whether it is on black rights, whether it is on domestic violence, and whether it is on young people. Young people now apparently causing the coronavirus, despite the government, of course, telling us to go out and eat out to help out, despite the government saying everyone back to work now. Of course, it's the young people now that they blame for the rise in the coronavirus. Well, the real person to blame is the failure of this government to invest in testing and tracing. And whilst Germany, France and other countries had their tracing apps working months ago, we still have not properly launched it here in the UK, because what did they do? They gave it to their crony friends in the private sector and it collapsed. The same with testing given to their crony friends in the private sector, and we've seen it collapse as well. But we have a different solution. And it's not just, of course, that a Labour government would do everything differently. It's that a Labour government would have different values. It wouldn't be about just giving contracts to our friends. It would be making sure that we do what is right for our communities. It would be making sure that we bring the NHS back into state hands, but also about making sure that we change the economic realities for people across this country. So no longer can future governments divide and rule. Universalism at the basis of everything. So housing is a right, not something for private profit. Education is a right, not something for economization. And that we tackle climate change, not just about having the latest tote bag or beautiful Tesla car, but we actually understand that dealing with the economic issues will actually deal with our climate crisis as well. Those are why those messages are so important, and why it's important that campaign group MPs and campaign supporters continue to put them, and that campaign group supporters elect on our NEC, the grassroots state. Why it is so important is because otherwise we become a Tory-led, austerity-like party again, where we say, oh, don't worry, Labour will be stronger on public spending than any other Conservative party that you can imagine. We say, oh, don't worry, we will protect our armed forces no matter if it breaks international law. We say, don't worry, the union's the most important thing, despite the Tories, of course, dividing up. That's what the old Labour Party did, and we can never go back to it, because it lost the 2010 election when I was door knocking. It lost the 2015 election when I was standing. We can't go back to losing elections, because remember, comrades, that's what happened those two times as well. Let's not rewrite history and pretend that we, of course, lost the argument. We did not. The public changed. We need to win those arguments again, but we cannot go back to austerity light, or we become like the shell of the Democrat Party that we see at the moment, that's struggling to even win against Trump when he's the worst president we've had in history, because Biden, frankly, is useless, despite, of course, us needing to support him. And we must make sure that our party is a party of vision, a party of hope, a party that not only rebuilds this country, but rebuild our communities. So thank you, everyone, for coming along. Thank you for supporting us, and make sure you support the grassroots candidates in the NEC elections. Otherwise, we will really go backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you. And I'm just going to offer apologies from Kim Johnson MP, who wanted to be with us earlier today, but we had some technical issues. But just like all of the fantastic MPs from the Socialist campaign group, she is not going anywhere. So I'm sure you'll get a chance to hear her at some point in the coming months. Now, this is the third year we've actually done a rally at Labour Party conference, and each year it's been one of the biggest meetings of any of them. Now, I believe that some would probably want the left to pack their bags and leave, but it's very clear that we are not going anywhere. So on to our next speaker, who is definitely someone who's not going anywhere, because you can't tell him anything. Couldn't get him to leave if you wanted to. It's Ian Lavery, MP, the Member of Parliament for Wansbeck. Ian.
Thanks very much, Bill. I'm delighted to be here, by the way, with the fantastic group of MPs in the Socialist Campaign Group. You know, it's been mentioned that we've got a great intake in 2019, but collectively, what a bunch of solid individuals who, you know, have got the knowledge to take the Labour Party politics forward in the direction that we believe will assist the people in our communities. Now, I'm standing here screaming in my bedroom. I've got my laptop on top of a file, on top of a cardboard box, on top of a desk. If the HSE came in here now, they would lock my house up. But you know, it is different. It's really strange speaking to thousands of people from your bedroom, and I can see that people are already looking in the street. What's Lavery ranting about now? But hey, isn't it worth it for the cause? Probably it's before I go any further, I just want to say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter isn't a movement. Black Lives Matter is a movement. And I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with that organisation and all my comrades who will not shirk at their support for organisations such as the LM. But you know, it's not called a struggle for nothing. It really isn't. We have got a huge challenge ahead. But when has the left not had a challenge? When have we not had this challenge? We've been opposed for generations. The Labour Party was founded on a challenge. It was founded by the trade union movement for ordinary working people because of the way in which they were being treated in society. You know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, the Skinners, the Bens, and many others. And at the same time, we walk alongside millions of ordinary, desperate people, desperate for a better life, not asking for luxury, just asking for common decency, for respect, for dignity. And that's the challenge we face as a Labour Party since the 2019 election. Of course, times are difficult. I'm still badly bruised from what happened in 2019. But understand one thing, mind, and that is we'll not change anything by sulking. We'll not change anything by standing back. We've got to have a vision for the future. We've got 550,000 members, greatly enthused members of all age groups. We need to be using, unleashing the fantastic array of talent that we've got into the communities. We cannot just campaign at election time and knock on people's doors and expect them to understand what we stand for. We need community organising in communities up and down the length and breadth of this country on a day-by-day basis. And that's the way that we can progress the socialist ideals that we're all so proud of. And I'm going to say this, by the way, abandon the 2017 and 2019 suite of policies in the manifestos. We abandon them at our peril. Because people widely accepted the wonderful array of policies which we had at both those elections. And I'm going to say, by the way, I'm not apologising for the offer we gave to the British people. I'm not apologising. But I'll tell you, there isn't any limit on hope, on aspiration, on equality, justice and fairness, on respect and on decency. That's what we offered. And how dare anybody, particularly in our own party, suggest that we were too generous in our message, in our offer of hope, aspiration, and everything which I've just mentioned. Colleagues, comrades, I was a young miner. I fought for socialist policies, which we offered in 2017 and 2019, all my life. We're committed to investment in education, in the NHS, in housing and social security, in climate change, in workers' rights. I mean, they're fantastic policies to campaign on. It's the right, but they're not even on the left. They're not left-wing policies, they're mainstream policies. Comrades, we need as a party to ensure that we welcome in society migrants and asylum seekers into the society in which we live. Does it not break your heart to see these migrants in a dinghy with shovels trying to get to a better life? And hear some of these people in the press and in the media and in our communities saying that we should make sure that they never reach our shores. We've got to change that. We've got to challenge. We've got to tackle it. We've got to tackle poverty, whether it's child poverty, whether it's pensioner poverty, whether it's fuel poverty. We've got to tackle homelessness, crime, inequality, racism, fascism. We've got to challenge this hostile environment. We've got to commit ourselves to the nationalisation of the rail, of water, of the Royal Mail, much more, if we're to succeed as a decent society. You know, we've got to focus on class politics, comrades. We've got to get rid of this culture politics, which the Tories are trying to draw us into, and focus on class politics. We can only ever win an election if we have a movement which encourages people from the middle classes and the working classes. We cannot win without one or the other. And we've got to work hand in hand. We've got to work hand in glove with a liberated trade union movement. We've got to break the shackles of the anti-trade union legislation, break the chains that prevent fantastic trade unions representing people who are most at need. And we've got to repeal anti-trade union laws. We need a bold vision for the future. We cannot just be in opposition to the leadership as it stands for the sake of being in opposition. We need to support the party to get the party in government, but challenge and question when we think the party's heading in the wrong direction. We need more key workers, we need the nurses, we need doctors, we need people who have actually done a day's work, a day's graft in their lives, to be coming forward as councillors and representatives and members of parliament. We need a whole array of new people on the Labour Party green benches. And that's the way that we'll cut through. We need more BAE representatives. We need more community champions, people who've got a track record in their communities, elected to serve the people in their communities. So we've got to reflect the communities in which we live in the Commons. It's terribly unbalanced at this point in time. So comrades, it's not a time to cry into a beer. It's not a time to abandon ship in the hope that we might just avoid hitting the political rocks. There cannot be any holding back. Socialism is the answer. It's time to agitate, educate, and organise. It's time to unite. It's time to build that future that many can only dream of. Socialism is the answer. Colleagues, our dreams most moderate are. We only want the earth. Solidarity.
Thank you, Ian. It's fantastic. We are asking everybody, if you like what you're hearing, and I'm sure you do, to make sure that you are following us on Twitter. You can see the various links in the chat. It's at Socialist Cam, C-A-M, and sign up to our fortnightly newsletter. There's a lot of great stuff in there every couple of weeks. So all the way now from the People's Republic of Salford, we have our flag bearer from the last leadership election, the fantastic Rebecca Long Bailey MP. Becky?
Thanks so much, Belle. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking tonight, and it's an even bigger pleasure to be speaking after Ian. Ian is a bit like, the best way to describe how I feel after listening to Ian speaking is like when you give your 5-year-old a packet of Smarties, particularly the blue ones, and they get hyperactive and excited, and that's how I feel now. So it's a tough act to follow, but we've got a fantastic group within the Socialist campaign group, and you've heard from some of our fantastic MPs already tonight, but I also want to send a shout out and some love to the fantastic colleagues who lost their seats in the last general election. It's not been the same without you, and we know that you'll be back very, very soon, and we'll make sure of that. But this crisis, it's laid bare to me, really, the very value of human life. We've been told that it's a juggling act between protecting public health and protecting jobs and the economy, but protecting lives and livelihoods should not be a trade-off. They should go hand in hand, and it's our job now to set out how only a radical economic response to this pandemic has any chance at all of protecting both. But where are we now? We're not in a very good place at all. We know in Salford, for example, we're on red alert. We're incredibly worried. Months ago, the government told us that schools and workplaces would only reopen when the R rate was below 1. It's now above 1. They were advised by scientists that getting the economy moving, getting children back into school, it was reliant on a widespread functioning test, track, trace and isolate system. But it isn't functioning. They had no real plan. On schools alone, the guidance was changed over 41 times, and we saw the demonisation of trade unions for having the audacity to raise valid safety concerns, to demand functioning testing regimes, and to have a plan B for blended at-home and school learning in the event of an outbreak taking place. For workers, the picture was just as bleak. The furlough scheme offered some temporary reassurance, but there were millions who fell through the net, who didn't have the right to sick pay if they got ill. There were over 3 million people in the UK, from musicians to freelancers to new starters to gig workers, who couldn't access much in the way of support at all, and they couldn't afford to take out any of the government loans that the government was trying to laud so much. And now we're at a stage where the government refuses to extend the furlough scheme at the time where people are likely to need it the most. They refuse to keep the ban on rent evictions at the time when people are the most precarious. Most people, we all know, are only one paycheck away from financial devastation, and with the prospect of mass job losses on the horizon, some inevitable due to the lack of support that businesses have got, and some deliberate, unfortunately, manufactured by unscrupulous employers. And we've got the makings of the worst financial crisis we have ever seen. Now, we can stop this. We can offer hope, but tinkering around the edges isn't going to work. We need to offer the most radical economic and industrial plan that this country has ever seen. Firstly, the rights of workers have got to be strengthened, and that means introducing sectoral collective bargaining. It means restoring and expanding trade union rights. It means creating a single status of worker, boosting the minimum wage, reducing working hours where that's possible, and establishing a minimum income guarantee. Secondly, the safety net that people need to keep themselves safe at this time, that's got to be provided without equivocation, because failure to support people now, it's only going to damage the economy even more in the long run. So that means extending the furlough scheme. It means banning evictions. It means ensuring that the 3 million who were excluded from government support are included. It means decent sick pay. We've got one of the lowest levels of sick pay out of all of the industrial nations in the world. And it means real support to businesses in return for conditions on job guarantees and decent pay, and a good record when it comes to the climate. And finally, how do we pay for this over the longer term? Well, the answer's been staring us in the face all this time. A Green New Deal. It's a catalyst for manufacturing, for rebuilding deindustrialised towns across the UK. And at its very heart is a plan to restructure and rebalance the economy as we know it, using elements of public ownership to drive the change we need to see, and to redistribute the prosperity that's generated to those who need it. And we set out those plans at the last general election, and now the party has to build on them. We showed that with just an average investment of 1.9% of GDP each year, that would have generated 800 billion across the UK by 2030, and it would have created 850,000 jobs across the energy sector alone. So you see, we can use this moment if we broaden our horizons and we grasp the opportunity to develop those radical policies. We can bring our movement together and our country together to instigate economic change on the scale that this crisis requires. But if we don't, it's not just going to be our recovery from the pandemic that will be in peril. It will be tackling climate change, and it will be any shred of trust that we are trying to build in the communities that we live, that we actually have the answers to the real problems our neighbours face. So don't forget, in these difficult times, the real reason that you keep fighting against injustice, alienation and poverty every day is because there's nothing more important than protecting and nurturing human life. It's not a highfalutin political theory. It's here. It's in your heart, and it's the understanding that nothing less than a decent standard of life and economic security is deserved by all. Now, we say in the People's Republic of Salford, the welfare of the people is the highest law. And so I say to everyone on this call tonight, never give up until that becomes a reality.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. Now, we are having amazing messages pouring through from everybody that's listening on social media. Other than the fact that Jeremy's cat El Gato has been seen on camera, we have some messages from people who are really, really encouraged by what they're hearing today. There's one that says, thousands of Labour members regaining hope, hearing messages of solidarity from the Socialist campaign rally. And you know, that is a fantastic thing. I know over the past few months, many people on the left have thought to leave the party, and some actually have, but now is not the time to leave at all. We need to stay, we need to organise, we need to fight hard for the policies that we put forward over the past 5 years, the policies that we know would have been the right thing for this country. And over to our next speaker, who is one of the key defenders of these policies. The person who's really in charge, everybody knows the chair's not really in charge, it's the secretary. And our secretary for the Socialist Campaign Group is the fantastic Richard Bergen, the Member of Parliament for Leeds East.
Thanks very much. The coronavirus crisis has laid bare deep failings in our society, in the economy and public services, in social care, workers' rights, the housing market, and the social security system. And that's not just the failure of an incompetent Prime Minister, it's the failure of a rigged system and a failure of a rotten ideology caused by a decade of austerity, but also by 4 decades of neoliberalism. And it's no coincidence that it's in the neoliberal countries like the UK, like Brazil, like the USA, that there are some of the highest death rates from coronavirus. And I'm afraid you ain't seen nothing yet, because these systemic failings are going to become deeper and deeper as an unprecedented job crisis hits in coming months. We are at a crossroads. The economy is collapsing. Public health is in crisis. The planet is burning. So what are we going to say about that? What are we going to do about that? When I think about the role of our party, the Labour Party, at such a moment, I'm reminded of a quote by Dennis Skinner, who said, "We can't accept the nostrum that we've got to wait and go to sleep for 4 or 5 years until there is a parliamentary election, and then the sun will shine." The crisis is happening now. We have to act now. Tens of thousands of lives are on the line. Millions and millions of livelihoods are at stake. So the ideas that we put forward now, the organising that we do now, can make a real difference to people's lives now. It can force the government to change track. We need substance and vision as well as competence. We need to be the party that has the answers to the crisis. That is how we show that Labour is on the side of millions. That isn't separate to preparing to win in 2024. It's part of winning in 2024. And when it comes to the policies that we need, many of the ideas were in our 2017 and 2019 general election manifestos, and Keir reflected many of them in his 10 pledges. Some will say, of course, that we lost because of our radical policies, but that's a myth. It's a myth pushed by those who want to keep the status quo. Our election defeat wasn't because we were too left-wing. It was because it became an election dominated by Brexit. That much is clear by the way the party is handling the Brexit debate at the moment. Polls show the population wants things to be done differently. They don't want a return to a pre-COVID economy. So the main job of all of us on the left is to win the battle for the alternative, to lay out the solutions to the crisis faced by millions, and to build the movements to win those policies. And to do so, we have to come up with a united programme of demands that we coordinate the whole left over. The left in Parliament, the left in our trade unions, the left amongst our party membership, the left in social movements across the country. So I want to commit tonight that the Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs will play a leading role in that. Over the coming months, we will work across the party and across the movement to set an agenda to force the government to change track. Take the immediate priority, the coronavirus public health disaster. The alternative needed to the government's failed approach is a zero COVID strategy. A zero COVID strategy is about mobilising the efforts of the state to eliminate the virus, as done in New Zealand, as done in China, Vietnam and elsewhere. That will save lives, and it's essential to getting the economy going again. It's a progressive solution to the crisis, based on mass testing and tracing at a local level, investing in our NHS and local public health teams so people can get a test and get results back in 24 hours. It's about kicking out Serco and their ilk from the failing testing system. It's about sick pay at a real living wage level so people can afford to safely isolate. It's about investing in smaller class sizes by rehiring teachers and turning community spaces into classrooms. It's about keeping people working from home if they wish and extending furlough so people don't have to go out looking for work. It's about eviction bans. And only progressives will fight for this agenda. And we need to tackle that social crisis too. Our answer to mass unemployment is full employment, using public works to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, including through a Green New Deal. It's ensuring benefits are enough to live on. That means an end to means testing, and it means a minimum income guarantee. It's about trade union rights, so bosses can't exploit this crisis with their disgraceful fire and rehire schemes. And it's about so much more. And I want to end on a note of hope. From the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you. Some may feel despondent at recent political events. I totally understand that. But we don't have the time for that. And while the right-wing media might like to claim that the socialist left is dead, it is a myth. We have tens of thousands of members, loads of great MPs, including left-wing trade union leaders at Unite, the Communication Workers Union, the UCU, the Fire Brigade Union, the Bakers Union, and others. People need to dust themselves down and get ready for a huge fight over the coming months to force the government to change track on health and the economy. Many lives and millions of livelihoods depend on it. Let's get to it.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. It's fantastic. We are almost to time. We are going to move straight on to our next speaker. Someone who does need little introduction, but so do many of our speakers actually, because they are all well-known socialists who have been campaigners in our community for a long time. Now, I wonder how our next speaker is managing to keep his blood pressure down as he watches the coronavirus pandemic and all of the economic recovery packages that are being put forward. Some of the things that the current Chancellor is announcing, thinking to himself, that's what I said, because that is what he said on many, many occasions. He may no longer be the shadow Chancellor, but he will always be the People's Chancellor. Our next speaker is the Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington, John McDonnell MP. John?
Thanks, Belle. Thanks a lot. I keep getting told this thing about Rishi Sunak is implementing your policies, John. Well, it's true. He's stolen some of our ideas, but the thing about him, he's absolutely crap at delivering them, isn't he, basically? And when he takes our ideas, he's half-hearted. And I actually, I can have a rant, but I better not. It's not good for my heart, really. Let me just say, I've listened to a number of, I'm sorry I'm late. I've been at another meeting, but in addition to that, I've got a bit of an internet problem as well. It goes on and off every now and again. If only someone somewhere had thought up the idea of having full fibre broadband all around the country, free at the point of delivery. I wish just someone had thought that up at some stage and we've been able to implement it. But there you are. Look, I'll be very brief, Belle, so we can catch up on time and listen to both Diane and Jeremy. I just want to say this. I've listened to quite a few speakers. The political programme that's been set out by Richard and others and Becky and Ian is just terrific. And if it does inspire, it gives us hope. That's the point that Ian made as well. And I don't want this to sound in any way patronising, but I tell you, in these last two elections, we've had a large number of young people be elected into Parliament, who I just think gives us hope for the future. The talent and the commitment and the dedication and the hard work that they put in, I just have nothing but respect for. And it just confirms to me about the future of the left in the Labour Party and our wider movement as well. And people should take heart at that, because as Richard said, I know people could be despondent after the devastating result of the general election, but it's interesting just how many people have rapidly picked themselves up as well and got back into the struggle. And I want to pay tribute to a few, I want to say well done to Unison at SOAS. The SOAS branch at Unison have had a major victory. They have a party tomorrow to celebrate. I want to say well done to PCS outside Tate Gallery, picketing on a regular basis. RMT still fighting about what's happening with regard to privatisation and the need to bring rail back into public ownership. Unite, fighting in my constituency against the fire and rehire, appallingly brutal treatment by British Airways, where they sack you and then take you back on and cut your wages and undermine your conditions. I want to pay tribute to the Unite for the work that they've done in representing my constituents and so many around the country as well. This fight back is taking place already. People have picked themselves up and they're fighting back now. And our job, our responsibility is to back them 100%. When someone plants that flag, we get behind them and support them in solidarity. On Friday, I listened to Noam Chomsky and he said, there are two crises that we face. Yes, of course, the pandemic and the economic consequences of that, but the two main crises are, of course, the threat of climate change catastrophe. But he also said there's a second crisis, which is the crisis of democracy, not just in the United States. He also linked it not just to Trump, but he also linked it to Johnson as well. And what Chomsky said is start panicking, because these are serious. Becky and others have mentioned about the Green New Deal and how critical it is. I want to talk about the crisis of democracy. The other day, I described Trump and Johnson as proto-fascists, and some of the media went at a pop at me for that. The reason we're using the term proto-fascist is because it means those individuals or movements that are showing basically that they've adopted many of the ingredients of the preparation towards fascism. What does that mean? It means you have political leaders like Johnson who has no respect for parliamentary democracy, no respect for parliament, willing to close it down if necessary, no respect for law, even willing to break international law and international treaties, sacks any civil servant that opposes them or gives them the advice that they don't want to hear, issues corruptly, as far as I'm concerned, contracts to their friends. And then also we now discover even more so, all the evidence are there, funded through their political party by Russian oligarchs. That's what I call proto-fascism. Harold Lasky, who is the chair of the Labour Party of the Second World War, said, fascism in this country won't come with a marching dictator with medals all over his chest. It will be a conservative authoritarianism that undermines our basic democratic values and undermines our democratic institutions. The bulwarks against fascism. That's what's happening. And we need to wake people up to this. We need to wake people up to the threat that there is in the Johnson government, and we need to mobilize. And that's why the most important thing now, yes, of course, we're concerned about what any party leader does, and we want to hold that party leadership to account. But let's not outsource our politics to any political leader, any party leader. Our politics has got to be built and created by us. And that's why the task for us now is build the movement. And that means supporting those individual struggles that are taking place. Others have mentioned it, I'm sure, the renters' struggle, Acorn and the Renters' Union forcing back the evictions and still campaigning, but then not just forcing back the evictions, actually bringing onto the agenda the whole discussion about why does landlordism exist within our country, when the Labour Party, when it was founded, was actually committed to abolishing landlordism. Supporting those trade unions that are, yes, defending their jobs, fighting for their wages, but look at what's happening in terms of the NHS. The unions within the NHS now are basically saying we want to protect jobs, want to protect wages, because Sunak is threatening a wage freeze, but we want the end of privatisation. We want our NHS back. In addition to that, you go across the piece. Also, let me just say this. We need to stand up for basic civil liberties and human rights. Refugees, asylum seekers have human rights. It's our task to stand up and for them and with them. And you know, one of the campaigns we need to get behind is, first of all, to welcome asylum seekers and refugees here. But secondly, one of the main campaigns I think we need to get behind is to ensure that we scrap the no resort to public funds that's forcing so many of them into poverty. And I tell you also, I welcome the day when we shut down the detention centres that are holding 1,000 people in my constituency who've never committed any crime whatsoever apart from come to this country looking for security and a better life, like many of our parents and grandparents did as migrants. I think they're the things we need to do now. We stake the claim for the better society that we want to create. All those policies that you've heard tonight from some incredibly powerful and eloquent speakers, of course, that's our policy program, but the onus is upon us now to recognize the seriousness of the situation, the proto-fascist leader that we have in Johnson, the way in which we've got to expose that. But in addition to that, the way in which we build the movement by supporting all those progressive campaigns that are out there and making sure when someone plants that flag against injustice, that we rally to that flag on their behalf. Solidarity.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. So we are moving on because we are going to get through this nearly on time. Our next speaker is somebody else who people say doesn't need an introduction, but I like to introduce her, not just because she's my favourite, but I think it's because too often people discount what it takes to be the first Black woman elected to Parliament, how much you face in that role and what that gets you. Diane Abbott is one of the smartest people I know, and that's saying a lot because I'm part of the Socialist campaign group with a lot of clever people, and she could have, you know, fallen out on her principles a long time ago, and that's something that she would never do. She has stood on the side of socialism repeatedly, and she has never, ever given up. So I'm pleased to welcome our next speaker, Diane Abbott, MP, the Member of Parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington.
Thank you very much, Belle. Can you hear me?
Yes, but I'm not sure I can see you.
Oh.
No, I can see you. There we go.
Well, I'm so pleased to be here at this meeting with so many brilliant campaign group comrades. Now, I have to begin by saying that it's been a sad 12 months. There was the terrible general election result. And it was not just a setback for the Labour Party, it was a complete tragedy for communities all over the country who find themselves with Tory MPs for the first time and will simply not get the representation they need and deserve. This country has never needed a progressive Labour government more. Instead, we have the Tories in power, featuring the likes of Gavin Williamson, who's caused so much damage to schools and our young people's prospects, the bumbling Matt Hancock, who's completely failed to meet the challenge of the coronavirus crisis, and above all, lording over all of it, is the disastrous Boris Johnson. Let me let the audience into a secret. Even some Tories are beginning to whisper that Boris is simply not up to the job. But the other thing that's cast a shadow over recent months is the coronavirus crisis. And the only world leader who has handled it worse than Boris has been his friend Donald Trump. Government ministers have been on television today complaining that ordinary people are not following the coronavirus rules. But who started that? None other than Boris's top advisor, Dominic Cummings, who shamelessly, flagrantly broke the rules, and Boris made endless excuses for him. So, of course, once people saw that it was one rule for Boris and his friends and another rule for the rest of us, support for the rules began to crumble with the rise in infection and deaths that we're seeing today. And unless this government gets to grips with the spread of coronavirus, there are going to be waves of further deaths. And unless it changes course on economic policy, workers across the country are going to face further huge job losses and pay cuts. The poorest will be hardest hit, with Black and Asian people bearing a big burden. We don't have to accept this outcome. Len McCluskey recently wrote to Boris demanding an extension of the furlough scheme, whereby workers get much of their wages paid. And he said that if they didn't extend the furlough scheme, there would be an avalanche of job losses. And then he was shown to be right. The Confederation of British Industry, the bosses organisation, is reporting that fully half of its member firms are planning further layoffs. This is in addition to the hundreds and thousands who already lost their full-time jobs in this country. The reason why the furlough scheme needs to be extended should be absolutely clear. The government's failed to get a grip on the virus, and the reporting that fully half of its member firms are planning further layoffs. This is in addition to the hundreds. The economy continues to struggle, and firms are laying off workers or cutting pay in response. And we see some completely unscrupulous employers who see the current crisis as an opportunity to cut wages, slash working conditions, and sack workers wholesale. British Airways is one example, but there are many others. And then there is Brexit. Just when you thought the debate about leaving the EU could not get any worse or more destructive, not only is Boris trying to force through a disastrous no-deal Brexit, he wants to do it by trashing the Good Friday Agreement and endangering peace in Northern Ireland. The truth is that everything Boris and his friend Dominic Cummings touch, they bring a unique combination of arrogance and incompetence to bear. But despite all of this, there are reasons to be hopeful. Under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn and the selection processes that were managed in the fairest and most open way for many years, a generation of brilliant new left-wing MPs have come into Parliament, and you've heard some of them tonight, including my comrade, Belle Ribeiro Addy, the member for Streatham. And as a bonus, not only is she a member for Streatham, but she took over from Chaka Amuna. We still have one of the largest socialist parties in Europe, which will be the basis of our fight back. And the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement is very important. It is an international movement which has generated a whole new debate about racial justice around the world and has involved a whole new cohort of young leaders, black and white. I said at the beginning of my remarks that this country's never needed a progressive Labour government more, but it needs the left, it needs the progressive forces in the party to come forward, because we have the policies, we have the people, we can offer the leadership. These are very dark and difficult times for this country. So we have to step up and offer the leadership and the thinking and the hope that the country needs. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much. She's an absolute pro. And of course, we will be voting against more of that disgraceful internal market bill that you mentioned tonight. Now, we are on to our final speaker. But before I introduce him, I wanted to tell you that we had 3,750 Zoom registrations, 5,000 people streaming from different platforms, streaming across a number of different left platforms, their Twitters and their Facebooks. We have had an amazing amount of people on the call today, listening to our fantastic Socialist campaign group MPs and listening to them outline some of the policies that we stood on over the last few years and those that we helped to push through the party over the next few years. Now, our last speaker, again, somebody who doesn't need very much introduction, but I think is very important for us to say that, you know, far too often people have a lot of crap. I'll say crap, but it's not a very parliamentary word. I'm trying to learn more parliamentary words because I'm sure I'm going to get myself into trouble in the chamber one day. But they have a lot of crap to say about Jeremy Corbyn. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful, because Jeremy completely transformed the Labour Party. He transformed our policies. He made it a Labour Party that I could be proud to be a member of, proud to be a member of Parliament for. And for the first time in generations, we saw young people infused, joining politics, getting active in socialist campaigns. And no matter what has happened, nobody can take that away from him and the fantastic work that has been done. So without further ado, we are going to hear from the Member of Parliament for Islington North. Forget the Islingtons, Member of Parliament from Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn MP, one of our socialist heroes. Jeremy.
Belle, thank you very much, and welcome to all the 5,000 people that are watching the campaign group rally tonight. That is the biggest campaign group rally we've ever held. Fantastic you're all with us. And next year, we'll probably be in a big hall somewhere, but let's keep up the live streaming as well, because that is a way of involving more and more people. Now, I want to say a huge thank you to my comrades in the Socialist campaign group in Parliament for being such brilliant friends, such great help, such advisors, and such supporters when times are difficult. And I want to say the same to tens of thousands of people all over the country who gave their all in the general elections of 2017 and 2019. But between those elections, they did so much to make our party more relevant on the ground, to make it the community-based campaigning organisation the Labour Party is and always ought to be. And they did a great deal to help change the policies of our party. Now, I know as much as anybody else that over the last 5 years, we've faced some enormous struggles. Struggles to democratise our own party, struggles to democratise our own movement, and struggles to bring about policy changes. The policy changes that John spearheaded on ending austerity, ending the economics of austerity, the public ownership of transport and railways, spearheaded by Andy MacDonald, the workers' rights agenda by Laura Pidcock and Ian Lavery and so many others, a decent human rights agenda by Shami and by Diane, and of course, the whole policy of the green industrial revolution put forward, particularly by Becky, who worked so very hard on it. Those policies brought together were actually very popular and gave people hope and an inspiration for the future. But we were faced with very, very powerful forces against us. Look at the way in which the Murdoch media behaved towards us from the very moment we won the leadership election in 2015. And look at the way in which powerful forces around the world, including Donald Trump himself, said he did not want a Labour government elected in Britain, at least not our kind of Labour government elected in Britain. I haven't read all the books that have been written about the past 5 years. I'm quite busy. I've got lots of very interesting things to do. But I simply say to those people that are offering coffee table analyses of what happened the past 5 years, forget the tittle tattle, forget the gossip, forget the nonsense, look at the raw power that was pushed against our movement and look at the way our movement came back with the policies that will actually transform people's lives. In the general election, yes, it did become a Brexit election. You might remember in Sheffield, I brought out some copies of the secret trade talks between Britain and the Trump administration, those secret trade talks to put our public services, not just our NHS, but our public services on the negotiating table for American companies to take over. Did the wonderful British media pick this up as a story of interest? No. They claimed that I'd been given them by the Russians. Their obsession with Russia overtook everything else. Well, I simply say this: understand what happened in the past 5 years, but also understand that what unites people is opposition to poverty, to austerity, to environmental degradation. And the COVID crisis has shown, as others have explained, in stark relief, in very stark relief, exactly what inequality is within our society. The numbers of BME doctors, nurses, and health workers who lost their lives during the peak of the corona crisis, the deaths amongst older people, particularly poorer older people, and globally the same story. You're not going to solve the corona crisis by outsourcing everything to Serco. You're not going to solve the corona crisis by wishing it away. You're going to deal with it by ending health inequality, by ensuring we have a fully publicly run and publicly owned national health service. And as we come out of this crisis, we don't slash local government spending, slash health spending, slash public health spending, and allow more people to go onto 0 hours contracts and all the insecurity that goes with it. The stress of people now, locked in at some places, going through mental health crises, terrified of the future, whether there'll be a job, whether their kids can go to school, what it's going to be. It's up to us to work with all of those people to deal with the health crisis, but deal with the social crisis and the economic crisis that goes with it. What this crisis has also shown is global inequality. Coronavirus doesn't know any national boundaries. Millions affected in India, in Brazil, in the United States, in South Africa, in so many other places. And the words of the World Health Organization calling for universal health care have not been heeded properly. And so let's not look in on ourselves, but look out internationally. Internationally for health justice, internationally for human rights, internationally for justice around the world. A refugee died crossing the English Channel very recently. Thousands, tens of thousands have died crossing the Mediterranean. Many more have died crossing the Aegean. 13,000 were rendered homeless a week ago when their refugee camp burnt down in Lesbos. And so let's have a humanitarian instinct towards those people that are refugees, but also recognize why they're refugees. Did those refugees start the war in Afghanistan, start the war in Iraq, start the war in Syria? Did they take part in the bombing of Libya? Were they the ones abusing human rights in Myanmar that has driven so many Rohingya into Bangladesh seeking a place of safety? And so instead of building up for a world of war, instead of building up for a world of armed conflict, let's instead develop what we did. A human rights-based foreign policy, a democracy-based foreign policy, a foreign policy based on a War Crimes Act, so that we are the beacons of human rights and democracy around the world. And the last thing I'd say is this. There are many crises that face the world. There is no greater crisis than the environmental crises. Be it fires in the Amazon, fires on the west coast of the United States, rising sea levels, burning forests in Siberia, cities sinking into the ocean in Indonesia, or people in Bangladesh and Sudan facing floods. It is a crisis all around the world. The green industrial revolution has got to be the right way forward. But the important thing to do in standing up for a green industrial revolution and environmental revolution is to make sure everybody, particularly the poorest in the world, benefit from it, and we end global inequality. Black Lives Matters took off all around the world because people could see something of their own situation in the campaign of Black Lives Matters, the movement of Black Lives Matters. But we win because we are strong. We win because we're organized. We win because we're part of every community. Political power is not just holding elected office. That is just part of the process. Political power is what you do, what you campaign for, what you do on the streets, how you support your friends, your family, your neighbors, how you defend jobs, how you build nurseries, build schools, create decent parks, and create a sustainable environment. Our Socialist Campaign Group is part, a very important part of the whole movement. And so when we're out there campaigning, we're campaigning together for the kind of world we all want to live in. I couldn't be more proud of the Socialist Campaign Group and the friendship and support it's given, and my absolute determination to spend all my time campaigning for socialism, for peace and for justice here and all around the world. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our rally tonight. And next year, we'll be in a big hall with lots of music. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you for all you've done and for all you continue to do. Now, you will keep hearing again and again that there is never a more important time for socialism. You'll certainly hear it from us in the Socialist Campaign Group. And that's because until we move towards the type of society we need, there will never be a more important time for socialism. We need to defend all of those policies that you've heard about over the past hour or so, and that's going to take some unity, and that unity is going to require some sacrifice, and That's not a sacrifice of our principles. For some of us, it might be a sacrifice of our egos and our tactics. We on the left do not always agree, but we have to agree on this fundamental thing, that we need the socialist transformation of society, and we need it now. So stay, unite, fight, sign up for the Socialist Campaign Group newsletter, follow us on Twitter, get involved where you can. Now, we're going to end with a new song that's just out. The new single is about Dennis Skinner, the Beast of Bolsover, the Socialist Campaign Group's honorary president. The aim of this song is to get it into the charts, with all of the profits going to the All Greed, Truth and Justice campaign. So please do have a listen and have a buy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, comrades, and solidarity to you all.
Set the nostrum that we've got to wait and go to sleep for 4 or 5 years until there's a parliamentary election, and then the sun will shine.
You get the bus at 6 a.m. for Parkhouse from Clay Cross. You get the bus because you're your father's son. You're sitting on a park bench watching rhododendrons bloom, singing Gracie Fields because you're your mother's son. And they wonder, what's he after? Making trouble, what's his game? This one can't be bought, this one can't be had. Keep your eye on this one, he's Tony Skinner's lad. Tony Skinner's lad. You get the Clay Cross Council chair, put that chain away. You're not standing up for me, sit down. Onto the Palace of Varieties, it's just your place of work, and your job standing up for those done down. And they wonder, what's he after? Making trouble, what's his game? This one can't be bought, this one can't be had. Keep your eye on this one, he's Tony Skinner's lad. Tony Skinner's lad. Get the bus at 6 a.m. Parkhouse, Clay Cross, Bolsover, Westminster, here we come. To win for working people what they're owed for what they've lost. You do the work because you're your father's son. And they wonder, what's he after? Making trouble, what's his game? This one can't be bought, this one can't be had. Keep your eye on this one, he's Tony Skinner's lad.
Most of the major leap forwards that have been made by the working class haven't been made down in the House of Parliament, they've been made on the streets and the picket line.
And they wonder, what's he after? Making trouble, what's his game? This one can't be bought, and this one can't be had. Keep your eye on this one, he's Tony Skinner's lad. Tony Skinner's lad. Dennis Skinner.
The nonsense that the Tories talk about turning the clock back, it's gone forward, it'll move on. The advance of socialism can't be stopped. It's never been stopped by prison walls, it's never been stopped by Labour cabinets. Never mind about Tories, the march